Good afternoon, everyone. We are just going to give it a minute for folks to come in from the waiting room. Thank you. Giving it just another couple of seconds. All right, it looks like we have started to level off. So thank you for joining today's webinar. The Housing Alliance of Pennsylvania is a statewide coalition working to increase access to safe, decent, and affordable homes for all Pennsylvanians. We work to fulfill our vision for a home within reach through state and federal policy advocacy, opportunities to connect, share, and learn from your peers, events, and our annual Homes Within Reach conference. If you aren't a member, we ask that you consider joining. You can visit our website to join as a member, or you can contact info@housingalliancepa.org for more information on membership. Today's webinar will run approximately 60 minutes, including questions and answers. If you want to ask the presenters a question, please use the Q&A function. The chat function is only to ask the Housing Alliance logistical questions about the webinar. Again, please use the Q&A feature for questions to the presenters. We will email you a recording of the presentation and any associated materials after today's webinar, approximately in a week's time. So we have some upcoming events. Our next webinar after today is going to be Tuesday, March 1st at 2 o'clock. We will be having our quarterly mediation peer exchange meeting. Our topic will be landlord engagement. We will do a federal policy briefing as a tee-up to the virtual Capitol Hill Day. So Wednesday, March 9th, we will be reviewing federal policy priorities and going over our virtual Capitol Hill Day. And then on Thursday, March 24th, we will be visiting with members of Congress in conjunction with the National Low Income Coalition on Housing Conference, their policy forum. And of course, please save the date for our annual Homes Within Reach conference. It will be December 7th through the 9th in Hershey, Pennsylvania. And last, I just want to make sure you guys are aware of our latest resources to take a look at all of our eviction prevention related resources and to learn more about what's happening around eviction prevention in the state of Pennsylvania. Please be sure to check out our eviction prevention page. And then also we ask if you're interested in what we're doing on the legislative front, to go ahead and check out our 2022 policy agenda. With that, it is now time for us to start today's webinar, revealing opportunities and challenges, an analysis of eviction filings in Pennsylvania. And with that, I pass it over to you, Phyllis.
Great, thanks, Gale. And hi, everybody. It's nice to have you here today. So a safe, decent, and affordable home is really what gives families and children the foundation that they need to achieve everything they want in life, their goals and their dreams, specifically related to health, both physical and mental, to educational opportunities for children, and to employment outcomes for adults. Before the pandemic, eviction was a significant destabilizing event for many families. The having to move is destabilizing in and of itself, especially if a family has to move multiple times. But we also know that with an eviction filing on one's record, a household generally has to seek housing that is in a neighborhood that has higher poverty rates and often has less access to good food, to good schools, and to public transportation. Before the pandemic, eviction was a problem, but with the pandemic, communities and organizations and people all across the state really started to focus on how can we prevent a massive increase in the number of households that are facing eviction. Today, what we're sharing is our analysis of eviction filing data comparing 2021 information with 2019, which is, of course, a pre-pandemic year. And Andrea Menino and Chihan Kim are going to share what we found. Data drives conversations about solutions. And if we can see what's working in the data, we can have a more powerful conversation about what we can do to prevent evictions. In 2020 and 2021, communities created a lot of programs with a mix of local, state, and federal resources. And you'll see that that mix of resources, that mix of programs had an impact on eviction filings, that eviction filings are down compared to pre-pandemic levels. It doesn't mean it's not still a problem, but some mix of programs worked. What we're also going to share is results from 2 programs operating in a few courts in Berks and Chester counties that are having a really great impact on evictions, and you'll see that in the data. So here at the Housing Alliance, we're using this information to guide our work, both on policy and programs. And what we're interested in as a follow-up is local conversations about what this data means for what's already happening in your community, and also what it means for what you might want to put in place in your community. We're interested in particular in the places where eviction filing numbers or rates are highest. So if you're interested in that type of conversation in your community, definitely let us know. Andrea and Chihan are going to go over what they found in the analysis, and then we'll have time for question and answer. As Gale already said, if you have a question, make sure to put it in the Q&A at any point during the presentation. And before I introduce Andrea and Chihan, I want to get a sense of who's joined us today. So we have almost 300 people who expressed interest and who are part of today's event, but we just want to get a sense of what type of organization you represent. So Gale, can you launch the poll? So some of you may represent, your organization may actually fit into a few of these boxes, but just check one so we get a sense of, again, who's here today. And Gale, when it looks like we have a good percentage of responses, you'll share the results.
Yeah, we're looking at 80% of respondents. Let me share those results. Are you able to see them?
I can see them, yes. Can you scroll down? I think there might be another few options. Oh, I can scroll down. All right, great. So again, we did this just to get a sense of who's here, but as we think about using this data, we want to think about other types of individuals and organizations that we should be talking to. So thanks to everyone for participating in the poll. And with that, I will hand it over to Andrea Menino and Chihan Kim.
Great, thank you, Phyllis. And thank you everyone for joining us today. Again, my name is Andrea Menino. I am the Associate Director of Research and Evaluation here at the Housing Alliance, and we're thrilled to present you Revealing Opportunities and Challenges and Analysis of Eviction Filings in Pennsylvania. Next slide, please. First, I want to thank all the people and the organizations that have made our work possible. We have had phone calls, Zoom calls, and emails with Jennifer Lopez and Don Smith. So Jennifer Lopez works with the Friends Association and the Eviction Prevention Court in Chester County. Don Smith is a volunteer lawyer with Mid-Penn Legal Services in Berks County, and they helped share information about those programs with us. Thank you to the data that we've received from the Administrative Office of Pennsylvania Courts, and to the other organizations where you can find public eviction data from Eviction Lab and Legal Services Corporation. Also, thank you to all of the Ewrap administrators, or the Emergency Rental Assistance Program administrators across the state trying to stabilize households. Also, this work was made possible with funding from the Oak Foundation, Bank of America, and Wells Fargo. Next slide, please. So this afternoon, I will first do some basic level setting so people understand the points of the eviction process we are highlighting. I will discuss the goals of the analysis and present some of our major findings. Then my colleague Chi-Hun Kim will do a deeper dive into the actual analysis, and he will demonstrate a few of the interactive plots that we have on our website that will allow you to see eviction data at the county and zip code levels across the state. Next slide, please. This eviction analysis has been in the works for quite some time at the Housing Alliance and built off of our prior eviction prevention work. When the pandemic started, the Housing Alliance switched its primary efforts to eviction prevention. Early on, we published briefs on who was most affected by the economic shutdown. We issued a landlord communications toolkit so that we continued to update. And we began convening the landlord-tenant mediation programs across the state. This past summer, we held a virtual forum on creating a statewide eviction prevention strategy. We have also been heavily involved in working with the Emergency Rental Assistance Program administrators across the state and supporting them in their efforts to get rental assistance to landlords and tenants faster. Recently, we started to publish case studies on different communities and their eviction prevention and diversion efforts. All of these resources and publications can be found on our website under Our Work, Eviction Prevention. Next slide, please. We will be discussing different parts of the eviction process today. And so I'm just going to give you at the most basic, a basic flow of the eviction process. So the eviction process consists of first, a landlord notifying a tenant that they will file an eviction unless a breach of lease is fixed. So assuming throughout this, the tenant is unable to resolve the breach of lease, then the landlord files the eviction, a hearing is held, a judgment is rendered, and assuming in favor of the landlord, a landlord can then request and a judge issues an order of possession that allows a constable or sheriff to physically eject a tenant from their home. Again, this is very basic, and an actual eviction is much more nuanced. In our presentation today, we'll be focusing on three major points in the eviction process. First, in the orange circle farthest to the left, we have the landlord files the landlord-tenant complaint. This is our eviction filing. The next closest circle is where the judgment occurs. And then finally, at the end of the process map, assuming a judgment in favor of the landlord is where the landlord can request an order of possession. Once this is issued and delivered to the tenant, this is when the legal physical displacement of the tenant may take place. Next slide, please. So why did we put in right to know requests to obtain court data on eviction filings in the state? Simply put, we wanted to better understand evictions so we are better prepared to prevent them. We wanted to understand the dynamics of eviction filings in Pennsylvania, and we saw that they followed national trends. We wanted to see what communities were most affected by evictions and who were most at risk. Finally, we also wanted to see if we can show the effects of eviction prevention measures. We need to be able to build the case that eviction prevention and diversion works. As many of you know, these programs take time to set up systems, build relationships, and they need funding. To effectively foster champions for these programs and have the courts as our partners, we need to be able to show that these programs work. Next slide, please. I will highlight some of our major findings, and then Chi-hun will walk through the analysis behind these findings. So first, tenant protections work. They reduced eviction filings, and as many of the tenant protections are ending or have ended, we are seeing an increase in filings, though right now, statewide, they're still below pre-pandemic levels. We are seeing that local programs are reaching solutions that benefit both the landlord and the tenant. Many communities that experienced high rates of eviction filings prior to the pandemic are still realizing a high rate of eviction filings. Some communities are more affected by evictions based on their demographics or their socioeconomic status than others. Most eviction cases involve a rent in arrears, so back rent that is owed. And then with the end of the moratorium, as we're seeing an increase in eviction filings, we are also seeing an increase of orders of possession issued, although they are still below pre-pandemic levels at this time. So right now, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Chi-hun Kim.
Thanks so much, Andrea. My name is Chi-hun Kim. I'm the Research and Education Manager here at the Housing Alliance, and let's dive into the data. So this plot shows you the number of eviction filings that were filed statewide in PA, starting from the January of 2020 and continuing to the end of last year, 2021. So the first 3 months you see in the very left are during the immediate pre-pandemic times. And as you see the pandemic hit in mid-March, you see the number of filings plummet down to nearly zero. That was during the period where the courts were physically closed and there was a statewide judicial moratorium in effect. That moratorium ran out at the end of August in 2020, and that immediately caused a very significant spike in eviction filings, upwards of 3,500 filings made in a few days between the end of the PA moratorium and the start of the CDC eviction moratorium, which came into effect a few days after the beginning of September 2020. And after that, that did help bring down eviction filing levels, though a somewhat higher rate than during the PA moratorium. As we know, that moratorium first expired and then was invalidated by the Supreme Court during August of last year. And since then, we've seen eviction filing levels rise to about 70% of the pre-pandemic or 2019 filing levels for the last 4 months of the year. We can also dive down a little more deeply and look at what the filing counts and filing rates were in individual counties. So one reason why we want to look at rates as well as the raw filing counts is that, of course, different counties or different regions of Pennsylvania have different numbers of rental households. So the relative risk of a rental household getting a eviction filing against them will depend on how many renters live in that area. So in the left, in the navy bars, you see just the raw counts. You see statewide, there were upwards of 60,000 filings made in 2021. And you can see that individual counties that are the largest, Philadelphia and Allegheny, lead the pack there. In the left, in the right, in the orange bars, you see the eviction filings rate. That is simply the number of filings divided by the number of renter households. So statewide, there was a filing rate of about 4%, but you see that varies greatly across the different counties. And if you look at the counties that are in the top 10 on the right versus the left, you see some of the counties are repeated, but others are not. So counties with high eviction filings rates really span the gamut of most of the regions in the Commonwealth, and it's not a problem that is limited to just the top counties by population. And just to put this into perspective here, the filing rate of 10% means that, roughly speaking, about 10% of all the renter households, or 1 in 10 of all the renter households in the county, received an eviction filing last year, and 5% means 1 in 20. So those are pretty sobering numbers, even though eviction filings were down last year compared to pre-pandemic years. So what can we do about this? What are some of the local programs that are acting to prevent evictions? We took a look at 2 local programs that are working on the ground. The first program we looked at is the program in Chester County called the Eviction Prevention Court. This is a program that was launched in September of 2020 by the Friends Association of Chester County. The program involves 3 participating magisterial district judges, or MDJs. MDJs are locally elected judges at the very local level who hear cases like eviction filings. The program, in fact, files a right to know request with the courts every week in order to find out the contact information of tenants who are sued in eviction court. And they contact the tenants, sometimes even by door knocking, with information about the resources that are available to them in these participating courts. Some of these resources that are very important include tenant representation through an attorney and a court coordinator who helps act as a sort of clearinghouse at court. So as Andrea went through in the overview of the eviction process, we wanted to look at those particular points and see what kind of effect this program might have had. So in order to do that, we compared these 3 participating MDJs who are participating in the program compared to the other more than a dozen MDJs in Chester County that are not participating in this particular program. And we also looked at the outcomes of those cases in 2019 versus 2021. Of course, we know that very major events intervened during the time, but one of those events was the beginning of this program. And by comparing courts that are participating in the program versus courts that are not, we hope to tease out some of the effects this program might have had. So this first chart shows you the kinds of dispositions that cases can reach. So let me walk you through the types of dispositions that you see listed there on the left of the chart. So at the hearing, the judge can find the case for the plaintiff, which is generally the landlord, if they're suing for eviction, or they can find for the tenant, the defendant. Cases can also be withdrawn. So a landlord can lodge a case, and then if a situation changes, the case can be withdrawn, or can be settled between the parties. The case can also be dismissed by the judge with the possibility to refile later. So the most important comparison here is the bars in the yellow, which are the participating judges in the Eviction Prevention Court, versus the bars in the navy, which are other judges who are not participating. Before the pandemic, that is 2019, that's the top half of the plot. And you see there are relatively little differences between the courts that are participating and the courts that are not. So you see that before the program went into effect, there were not great changes. However, even though the pandemic affected people countywide, right? This pandemic did not select for people who are participating, who are living in those participating judges' districts. We see a major difference emerge. So I want to draw your attention specifically to 2 parts: the bars for withdrawn cases and the bars for settled cases. Before the pandemic, in the participating courts, about 12% of cases were withdrawn. But after the program went into effect, it's 31%. So that's almost 3 times more likely for a case to be withdrawn after this program went into effect. Similar pattern we see for settled cases, from 10% before the program to 24% after the program. That's an increase of 2.5 times. So these are hundreds of tenants who are, even though they were filed in court, they were avoiding all of the downstream consequences of being actually evicted. Through the efforts of the program and through the negotiations and the tenant representation that the folks who have filings are able to receive. We can also look at the other endpoint that Andrea mentioned, which is the order of possession. That is a legal instrument that basically authorizes the sheriff to come to your door and basically kick the tenant out. And here we see the same comparison between the courts that are participating versus other courts in Chester County. Again, before the program started, there were very little differences, but after the program, even though the rates dropped in both counties, that was likely an effect of the pandemic and probably the CDC moratorium. The drop was much greater in the courts that were participating, dropping by 2/3 from 38% to 14%. So that was Chester County. We also looked at a different program that is operating in Reading, in Berks County. This program was started by attorney Don Smith, who is a pro bono attorney working with Midtown Legal Services. And this program is targeting tenants in a particular courtroom of Judge Tanya Butler, who represents a district in Northern Reading that is really hard hit by evictions. So this program also offers information about resources and representation to tenants, and they do so, information gets to the tenants before the hearing. And the tenants we've heard from Mr. Smith are dramatically more likely to be present at the hearing. And that makes a real difference along with all the other resources that are offered by the program. So this is looking at dispositions again. It's the same chart as we saw, same kind of chart as we saw with Chester County. In this case, we're comparing Judge Butler's courtroom, which is in gold there. The other courtrooms in Reading, which is a city that is especially hard hit by evictions, that are in gray, and in navy are all the other courts in Berks County. Again, I want to draw your attention especially to the bar for withdrawn cases. 7% in 2019 of cases were withdrawn in Judge Butler's courtroom. That figure has changed 30%, growing more than 4 times. And in this particular courtroom, judgments defendants have also risen about 3-fold. And that is while these outcomes for the other courts in Berks County have not changed dramatically, unlike the court of Judge Butler. And we're looking at orders of possession. We see a similar pattern as we saw in Chester County. Although the rates of cases being issued in order of possession was dropped across the board, the rate was much greater in Judge Butler's courtroom where this diversion program was operating, being cut down more than half, from 43% to 17%. So these are really, when I saw these data, I was actually really shocked at how dramatic the changes were. And these are programs that involve a lot of shoe leather, but they're resulting in outcomes that are in fact amenable to both of the parties being represented in court. As you saw, many cases were being withdrawn or settled, which indicates that the outcome was something that the landlord who filed the case also could benefit from. This is kind of zooming back out to the statewide level. So fortunately, although we weren't able to get address level data from the state court system, we were able to localize cases according to zip code. So for every zip code in PA, we were able to map basically the level of filings as well as the filing rate. And if I can try something a little adventurous here, I'm going to try to navigate to our map. So here is a map of Pennsylvania, and each of these zip codes, we were able to see how many eviction cases were filed there and the rate in that zip code according to the number of rental households that live there. The zip codes that are highlighted in gold here are basically the zip codes that have rates of more than 5%, meaning 1 in 20 households roughly got an eviction filing in 2021. And just to reiterate my earlier point that it's a problem that is not limited to particular parts of the Commonwealth, you see these yellow zip codes are in regions all over PA. Once the web version of the report is launched, you'll be able to navigate this yourself and see, for example, if I'm just going to pick on our state capital, Harrisburg. If you live in zip code 17104 in Harrisburg, there were 595 cases filed last year, which given that there are 4,635 rental households, that means 12.8 cases were filed out of every 100 rental households. Going back to our slide, we are able to also use this zip code level data to compare the prevalence of eviction filings across different zip codes based on the demographic characteristics of the people living in them. So these and other following chart shows you for each zip code that has more than 100 renters in it, what the eviction filing rate is there. We looked at factors that have been shown in previous literature to be important in other areas of the country. And the factor that comes up again and again is the factor of racial inequality. So here we're looking at zip codes based on the percentage of renters who live there who are headed by people of color. And as you can see, as the percentage of renter households that are people of color increases, the eviction filing rate also increases. On average, there's a very huge effect that the most vulnerable zip codes are the ones with the most people of color. You can also ask if this is really dependent on income. So remember, this is looking at just a single factor, but we basically see there's no real correlation between the percentage of renter households living in a zip code that make less than 25,000 and the eviction filing rate. It's basically a flat line, and the average everything washes out. We can get a slightly closer look by looking at the percentage of renters who are rent burdened, that is paying more than 30% of income on their rent. And here we see that on average, as the percentage who are rent burdened increase, the eviction filing rate also increases. And that's no surprise. The more burdened renters are also more likely to be evicted. And here is another factor that has been shown again and again in previous work to be important. That is a number of renter households that are headed by women who have children. And again, as a percentage of those households increase in a zip code, the eviction filing rate also increases. So households with children are really at special risk for eviction, which is extremely important to keep in mind considering the downstream effects of eviction. And those households that are headed by women are at even greater risk. Diving down a little further into the nitty-gritty of the eviction filings, we were able to look at the cases where the landlord had prevailed in the case and was awarded a money judgment. The case filings include a specification of what kinds of money judgments that landlords won. And we specifically want to look at what percentage of cases involve rent in arrears. And the answer is that it's the vast majority. And so in 2021, 85% of landlords who won their cases were awarded rent in arrears from the tenants by the judge. And this percentage was even greater in 2019. It was 92% in 2019. And you can see the other categories of costs and fees that are levied against the tenants. And so tenants who lose their cases are also usually required to pay court costs and fees, which can be fairly substantial as well. And this puts kind of the numbers to a simplified version of the chart that Andrea shared earlier. So this is a summary of the eviction process in Pennsylvania with the numbers we have from 2021. Unfortunately, we weren't able to include Philadelphia cases in most of these analyses because we don't have case level data from Philadelphia, but this is for all other counties in PA. So in 2021, if you look at the left side, 59,000 cases were filed outside of Philadelphia. And of those cases, about 14,000 cases were either withdrawn, settled, or dismissed before it even got in front of the judgment. But once judgment happened, only very few cases were found with the defendant, and the vast majority were found for the plaintiff. And all of those cases, as I mentioned a slide ago, the vast majority of those were awarded rent in arrears. And from there, the order of possession was issued in 17,000 cases, which is about a quarter of cases that were filed. Now, we're not able to exclude any cases where the tenant was evicted illegally outside of this process, but that does suggest that at least last year, there was a lot of room between a case being filed and an order of possession being issued. Now, an order of possession being issued doesn't necessarily mean the tenant is actually ejected or evicted from their home. Unfortunately, the case that we had does not record that. For example, the tenant could have used a process called pay and stay, where they could even hand the money judgment to the sheriff at the day of the eviction and avoid eviction. But unfortunately, we don't know exactly how often that occurred. And this diagram will also be available online as an interactive chart. So if I can refresh here, you'll be able to find for your specific county what the numbers were. Bear with me for a second. So here's statewide, but if you're interested in, for example, Allegheny County, you can see the numbers for that, or in Franklin County, for example. And after the webinar, we'll be sending you a follow-up email with link to all of these resources. Back to the slide. So I just want to give kind of zoom back out again and give you some concluding, I guess, a summary. So we have seen that since the end of the moratorium, filings have increased, although they have, because there are many programs that were in effect during this period. They did not immediately shoot up back to 100% of the historical level, but they have been inching forward. Thankfully, we have seen very little change to dispositions. That is, the percentage of cases that are being found for the landlord or the defendant or being settled or withdrawn, etc., have not changed very much. But orders of possession are being issued at a greater rate. Of course, at the same time, there are a lot of things that are happening. The CTC, expanded CTC payments were a lifeline to thousands of families during the second half of last year, although they have unfortunately ended the monthly payments now. Unemployment benefits were in effect through September, but of course have ended. At the same time, housing costs are still rising across the nation, sometimes in many cases by double digits, and Pennsylvania is no exception. And Ewrap is, of course, the major program which reached more than 110,000 renters last year, and that's just through November, so many more thousands will have been reached to date. And just to put that into perspective, that is about the number of eviction cases that are filed in 2019. So that is a very seriously large number. But unfortunately, that is a limited resource, and in places like Philadelphia and in Berks County have been running out. So in conclusion, we were able to look at evictions as a kind of a whole process rather than just the beginning, which is a number of filings. And we hope that sheds light into especially the effectiveness of the eviction diversion programs that have been operating in local communities. Eviction is not an issue that is just based on the biggest cities, that is faced by a large percentage or significant percentage of the renter population in many communities across Pennsylvania. As we've seen, eviction diversion programs can really have really dramatic effects to prevent evictions and get landlords paid and tenants safe and stably housed. And this confirms that what we've known, but something that we can specifically say also applies to Pennsylvania is that communities of color, those with higher rent burdens, and those families with children are at higher risk of eviction violence. And all of this combines together to give us a coming year that is filled with both opportunities and risk. We know that solutions like eviction diversion work, and things like rental assistance can help people be safely housed. But we also need to fight for those resources to continue, and for these programs to keep working and to expand these programs. And at this point, I'll hand it back to Andrea. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you so much for all of that, Chihan. So after hearing all of that and knowing who's joining us, we actually have two more polls that we wanna throw up. So I'm gonna ask Gale to share the first one, but we wanna know what eviction prevention work is going on in your community that you know about. As you see, we're trying to get a feel for what's going on around the state. Where are local programs happening? What are more popular programs right now, and where we need to address our attention for these programs. So Galen is gonna let you make the call of when we have a good amount of responses back of when to pull the poll.
They're still coming in. We got a lot of folks on the line today.
Well, that is great. I also love to see that we are having a lot of responses to a lot of these different programs. This will be a focus of ours, obviously, of getting all of eviction prevention programs, alternative dispute resolution programs in place and brought to scale where possible. Alrighty.
Great. I'm going to go ahead and end the poll, and so we can share the results.
Great, thank you, Gale. So I see many communities obviously have rental assistance in addition to Ewrap. So we know that there are funds for rental assistance in addition to the Ewrap. We have landlord outreach, that's great. Legal representation for tenants, obviously we've all seen that works and that matters. Court-based diversion programs, mediation and alternative dispute resolution, and some pre-filing diversion, great. And for those who have another type of work, yes, please share that with us in the chat if we're missing something. And Gale, I'm just going to ask you to put up our second poll. So this is an extension of that now. What we're asking is, what programs do you want to see in your community that you are exploring right now? Again, so these are the same responses that you just saw for what is in your community, but what are you exploring further in your community? And this helps us know where we can be of help to help launch these programs and get them going. And also advocating at the state level, whether that be to our legislators, state administrators, or even our court system to get some of these programs in place. Great, see a lot of things coming through right now. I'm so thankful for everyone participating in this and being here with us. Great.
It's like we're starting to level off. So I am going to go ahead and end this poll now.
Great, thank you. So seeing about a third of our respondents have, whether they're a little bit above or a little bit beyond or below court-based diversion programs, landlord outreach, legal representation, mediation, rental assistance, in addition to our Ewrap and pre-filing. So most of them, right? Like, so all of our programs are represented here. So that's great. And again, we ask that you share with us what programs you're looking into, what programs you have going on. We'd love to work with everyone around the state, within our capacity, of course, to bring these programs to light. Well, thank you very much. I'm going to turn it back over to our Executive Director, Phyllis Chamberlain.
Great. So thank you, Andrea and Chihan, for that presentation, both clear and a lot of meat to it, and obviously a lot for us to all dig into and think about. So we are going to answer some questions. So to the extent that we can answer it, Andrea, Chihan, or Gale, jump in. And if we don't know the answer, we will do our best to get back to you and answer it. So there are a few questions about the data itself. The first question is, what is the best way to make sure the race of the renter being evicted is properly identified in court documents? I ask because most of the time Latino folks are recorded incorrectly, which means we cannot get accurate statistics for our advocacy. So if I could just ask someone to just expand on that and maybe talk about what are some of the data points that we don't have that we know that we would like? So who would like to tackle that?
I can give it a shot. Unfortunately, the court documents do not include any racial or ethnicity information about the parties, including the tenant. And that is why we had to kind of take that roundabout way of looking at the zip code demographics in order to look at disparities. And that is a limitation of our data. Something that could get a hold on that is things like observations or people who are actually in the courtroom, and also things like qualitative data with interviews with the people who are affected. But our analysis looks at what is available in court data, and that unfortunately does not give you a specific identification for the tenant.
Anything to add, Andrea or Gale? Okay.
I would say one of the reasons why we're not seeing race or ethnicity reflected in court data is that oftentimes it's the plaintiff who's filling out the information, who is the landlord, and they are prohibited because of fair housing from actually asking or collecting that information on their tenants.
Thanks, Gale. Ewrap. Can we tell, so for people that don't know what Ewrap stands for, Ewrap is the Emergency Rental Assistance Program. It was funded through federal dollars and is being administered in every county in Pennsylvania. Can we tell the impact of Ewrap in the eviction filing data?
So our data, it doesn't dive that deep to break out the differences of all the various tenant protections, economic protections that went into effect. So Chi-Hun showed early on the slide of the weekly eviction filings from 2020 to 2021, and you saw eviction filings dip when the Pennsylvania courts closed. You saw it jump back up when there was no moratorium, and then you saw it dip back down during the CDC eviction moratorium and slowly rise up. We know that Ewrap is part of that. We also know that unemployment assistance is part of those protections, that the expanded childhood tax credit is part of those, child tax credit is part of those protections. Unfortunately, our analysis just doesn't break all of that out. In talking to the program administrators of the two programs that Chi-Hun highlighted in York and Berks County, we know that Ewrap is a big part of those programs and a big part of the protections that are helping the landlords and tenants reach those mutually agreeable solutions and stabilizing the housing for the tenants.
Yeah.
Andrea just said York, but she meant Chester and Berks.
Sorry.
Although there is good work happening in York that we have highlighted.
And we could just add one more thing. In the chart, you saw there was a huge spike, right, in September 2020 when the PA moratorium expired. The fact we didn't see another huge spike at the expiry of the CDC moratorium, I think that's a pretty huge testament to the fact that there were resources that are very significant resources that were available in August of 2021. They were not available in September of 2020.
Okay. There are a few questions about the details of the programs in Chester and Berks counties. Andrea, you already answered a question or two, but I thought for everybody's benefit, could you share a little bit more information about those programs and then also tell people what else we're planning to do to profile those?
Yeah, so we are also planning a deeper dive case study of both of those programs, so that will come in the coming months. Doing this eviction analysis was the first step of that, and very exciting to see the effects of those programs just through our eviction data, in addition to the testimony of the program administrators for those programs. So what happens with those programs? They're both voluntary. They're voluntary, so in Berks and Chester counties, they're voluntary for the tenants, the landlords, and the judges. And there are only specific judges in each program because you have to work out those agreements with those judges, with those courtrooms, and with those president judges. So the head judge for the county has to approve those programs. So there's a lot of relationship building there. So within those judges and those courtrooms, we have these programs that are operating, and what they're doing is before as Chi-Hun mentioned, in Chester County, they have a right to know request and they get the list of all the eviction hearings coming up. They reach out to the tenants, they let them know it's a voluntary program, and they tell them of the resources available to them, including limited legal representation. So yes, they do have limited legal representation at their hearings. They connect them, in most eviction cases, evictions are for payment of back rent, of rent arrears. So they connect them to the emergency rental assistance programs or other rental assistance programs. And both of these programs started before emergency rental assistance before the emergency rental assistance program. So they had other ideas or plans for rental assistance. And then they also connect them to other social service or legal service organizations should there be a more complicated issue that needs to be resolved. So they have limited legal representation, they get connected to rental assistance, and then they get connected to other legal or social services should they require them.
Thanks. So I just want to also note that as we here at the Housing Alliance are looking at what's working and exploring how we can help both at the policy and the program level, that our primary focus is how can we help renters and how can we stabilize and increase access to affordable housing for people that are making low wages. However, we always look at this issue and many other issues that we work on from the perspective of landlords as well. So we know that when tenants are unable to pay rent, that hurts the landlord. It hurts all landlords, but that's particularly true for landlords that are small businesses and individual proprietors. And we think that the programs that we're talking about today and many of the programs that have been put in place are of benefit to the landlord in addition to the tenant. So I just wanted to make that point that we are focused on the tenant, but we do care about the landlords and your business interests. So we do consider that, and we'll keep considering that as we're moving forward. So next question, can you talk again about the difference between numbers and rates for the eviction filings?
Sure. The number is simply the number of cases that are filed at their local court. The rate is simply the number divided by how many renter households in the area. So that helps us compare, an area where there'd be a lot of renter households compared to other areas that are much fewer renter households. But, if 1 in 5 renter households are getting an eviction filing, that's a significant issue, whether it be in a large county or a small county.
Great, thanks. So next question starts with a comment. I'm extremely surprised to see no correlation found between population prevalence of low-income households and prevalence of eviction filings, even if the primary driver of evictions is rent burden status. Is there no correlation, or am I misunderstanding?
So one thing I do want to clarify is that it is just looking at that one factor. And of course, we do know that those factors correlate. Eviction is a problem that disproportionately affects low-income people, but taken alone without looking at any other factor is a limited way of looking at it. At least that's what the analysis is suggesting. And so just looking at income, for example, rent burden is looking at both income and housing costs. And when you take into housing costs, the correlation, we see a correlation. So that's one way of answering the question.
Okay, thanks. So next question, how likely is it that the legislation Senator Hughes introduced will make it through with additional funding for Ewrap? I will take this one. So it's SB 1059, and unless I'm confusing it, I believe that this is legislation that would use some of the state's discretionary funding that Pennsylvania has from the American Rescue Plan and make more rental assistance available. I can't speak to its likelihood. I would say that I think we all agree that more rental assistance is needed, that some counties are either very close to spending their Ewrap allocation, which again is federal funding, that we know that rental assistance is needed. There are a lot of cases, the vast majority of cases where rent in arrears is a factor. So we believe that many cases are for non-payment of rent. We've got a lot of people that make very low wages. We know that the cost of housing is getting even more expensive. There's been a few articles about how rates, how rent is increasing pretty significant percentages. So we know that we need more rental assistance, and we're definitely supportive. So this question can you let us know what kinds of resources were being given to tenants ahead of the hearing? So this is related to the Chester and Berks County programs. Was it rental assistance? Andrea, you may have already answered it, but would you mind answering that again?
Yes, of course. So they were before the hearing, those programs were letting the tenants know that they had resources available. One of them was rental assistance. So the rental assistance, then that they would have limited legal representation at their hearings. And then in cases that required it, connections to any other legal or social services.
Thank you. So just we only have time for a few more questions. There's a few questions about court-based diversion programs and pre-filing diversion programs. The two programs that we talked about today, Berks and Chester, are voluntary, but they are court-based. They are in partnership with the court. So if people can share, if you have a court-based diversion program or a pre-filing diversion program, put it in the chat so we can share that information. So it looks like most of the other questions are repeats. Let me just make sure that there isn't another question that we haven't answered. Gale, I was also going to pass it to you to close us out. So while you do that, I'll see if there's any other questions. And let me just say too that, can you repeat, Andrea or Chihan, how to find this data and what we'll be sending out to folks?
Yes, so actually in a minute, I'm going to put the links to all of this in the chat. So there'll be the link to the full PDF report, the link to our shorter executive summary PDF, and then the link to the web-based interactive version where you can play around with the different charts and maps and see what's going on in your county or your zip code. After this, we'll also be sending out an email blast that will have all of these links. And in a couple of days, we will be sharing the recording of this webinar and the slides.
Great.
Great, thank you. So I just want to say thank you to my amazing co-presenters and to our research team here, especially Andrea and Chihan, who have just done, months of research and evaluating this data and scrubbing it and collecting it. And I think it's really paid off in just a very impactful way. And with that, I just want to, again, ask everybody who is on this webinar today to, please stay involved in this conversation and in this effort. There are many different ways that you can do that through the Housing Alliance. You can tell us what's happening locally. We are hosting community conversations at the local level so that we can hear directly from tenants and residents and low-income folks how the pandemic housing crisis has impacted them. You can join our quarterly peer mediation exchange. Like I said, there's a meeting, a webinar presentation happening on Tuesday. Of course, none of this happens without resources. So we need you to join in the fight for more resources. You can do that at the state level by joining our campaign to raise the cap on FAIR, a flexible funding source that can be used for eviction prevention efforts such as this. And of course, joining us at Capitol Hill Day to advocate for the federal resources that are needed to not only address eviction and homelessness, but expand the supply of affordable housing overall. So with that, I just want to say thank you to everyone for joining today's conversation. Thank you for the amazing work that you are doing on the front lines. And thank you to my own amazing team here at the Housing Alliance for giving us this great resource to help make the case.
Thanks, everybody.